Kia ora tātou katoa, nau mai, hoki mai ki tēnei hui, o te Committee Kaupapa Tai Ao, o tēnei rā. Welcome everybody to the meeting of the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee meeting for today, the 25th of February 2025. We'll start the hui with our noting the emergency procedures, and then we'll move into our opening karakia. Please feel free to join in. Me noi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kine ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. So next up we have apologies, noting apologies for Mayor Barry. The agenda papers had Councillor Shaw as an apology, but she is present. Also noting that Councillor Edwards is joining us online, and we also have Councillor Morgan, who's a non-committee member, joining us today, who can fully participate in questions and discussion, but is unable to vote. I'm happy to move apologies for Mayor Barry. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis. All in favour say aye. I declare that carried. Next up, we have public comment. We have no members of the public wishing to join us this afternoon. Next, moving into item 4, conflicts of interest. Any conflicts of interest to declare from members? No, thank you very much. Now moving on to the first paper for today, agenda item 5, update on solid waste and waste minimisation matters. Ashley, please come join us at the table. Oh, sorry, Jessica Heyman. Apologies. Jessica is our Senior Advisor Waste. If you've not met Jessica before, please feel free to make any opening remarks, and then we'll open up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, tēnā koutou. The paper today takes our usual approach, so setting out some highlights or updates on our main work. In the body of the paper, what we've also done is starting a bit of a dashboard approach. So this is confirming the projects we are planning for our local action plan. This is obviously a new approach, so we are open to understand what works well in that appendix, and also what could be clearer. So it's intended as a high-level snapshot of these projects and very open to feedback. The only other update would be on our Earthlink discount vouchers. We've got our January figures, and that was 960 discount vouchers for January. Kia ora.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jessica. Any question from members? Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Shaw.
Thank you for the report. Just in regards to the 2025 recycling calendars, someone came and spoke to me at the Jackson Street Fair who didn't receive one in the mail and didn't seem to know how they could otherwise get their hands on one. I think maybe they'd been to the website but didn't have a printer at home, so couldn't print one out. So I was just wondering how we let people know about these different options for getting their hands on that calendar.
My apologies, I don't know off the top of my head, but you might be able to help on the comms. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian.
So there was communications going out in December, and I'm pretty sure it included the Hutt News and social media, but it's absolutely possible there are people that just didn't see that or didn't come across the messaging. So if they do go to our website and make a request, then we can easily send one out. But there's a bit of a trade-off between sending out a calendar to every household, and we get lots of complaints from people saying, we don't want one, why do you send one out? It costs lots of money, versus doing it more selectively, and then you have got people missing out. So there's kind of a fine balance between the two.
Yeah, and I absolutely appreciate the new approach and that it's saving our ratepayers money from not sending them out to people who don't want them. Can I just ask that officers check that that's prominent on our website, how they can get their hands on one? If it's not already, it may be. Thank you.
We now have Councillor Shaw, followed by Councillor Parkin and Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, and great work on those vouchers. The increase has been phenomenal. Look, my question is on page 9, paragraph 13, and this might be a little bit out of your scope to answer, about developing a step-by-step guide on how to pack trailers, etc. I actually walk that route quite frequently, Eastern Hutt Road, and it's absolutely chock with rubbish because it's all tip rubbish coming off trailers. So do you know if there's been any noticeable drop-off of roadside rubbish, particularly along that stretch of road as a result of your flyer and the things that you did for?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not sure if we've been monitoring that strictly, but it could be something we can keep an eye out for.
I'll keep an eye on it in my next walks.
Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora, thank you for the report. Just thinking about the need for people to be able to get a physical copy of the calendar, have we looked at getting that information into the rates letter that goes out so that people know and get that with that piece?
I will have to check with the comms department on whether or not that was looked at or whether it was an option. So we can come back on that.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. It's a graph you've got here for the work plan, and it might already be in the answer down the bottom. It was about the weighting. Is that from the waste minimisation plan, or is that an internal weighting system to those projects?
Sorry, do you mind if I clarify? Is that on appendix, on the table one, or the? Okay. The weighting was based on a formula that we had looked at internally. So it's priority in terms of like team priority as against our LAP, diversion potential, so how much it has the potential in terms of tonnage to divert, reach, which is if it's quite a narrow focus, and then budget as well. So it's a formula that we're trialling, essentially, trying to keep and make sure it's accurate, but it probably will require adjustments and it may change over the course of the projects as well.
Thank you. Just to follow up, just to factor in the community impacts in there as well, so just for consideration.
Thank you. Yeah.
Councillor Brown.
Can I make a comment? I was asked for feedback.
Oh, just for questions at this point, we'll move into the motions and any discussion shortly. Any final questions? Councillor Parkin.
So I'm just looking at the page 12 and the bylaw implementation for C&D waste. One of the things that's come up in our long-term plan is reviewing the workload of different groups and the number of people in each of those teams. Do you know if we're still going to be able to implement that at this point?
That is something we're looking at quite actively at the moment, including planning to talk to the other councils about what their plans are for that as well. Obviously, there will be people operating on boundaries between the different councils, and ideally we can get an approach that's consistent between councils. But we are at fairly early stages on that, and it may be that we consider a lighter touch in the first instance in terms of capturing data, which we don't necessarily get before going to full-blown enforcement, but we're just working through that at the moment.
Great, thank you. I'm now going to move the recommendation on page 6 that the committee receives and notes the update on various solid waste management and minimisation matters. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis. Any comment? Councillor Brown.
Kia ora, just some feedback on the dashboard. Congratulations on the work. It's really good to see that, and for us just to have a level of something's in progress or for whatever reason it hasn't been started. So it's really good, and I like that you're weighting it as well. It needs to have some weighting, whether you get the weighting right. Yeah, it's great. I just want to differentiate that this, just from what Councillor Lewis said, this is not about the impact. This is just really a dashboard that talks about the work program to date. So I think it's really worthwhile. So thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Shaw.
Just want to add to Councillor Brown's comments as well too. I think it's a great example for other departments here to follow. Really easy to read once you blow it up a little bit. Yeah, I like the action points, the dates, who's responsible and all that sort of stuff. So well done on that. Thank you.
And finally, from me, just echoing the comments of our colleagues, as we said in the pre-agenda meeting, any data is good data. The way that we use it is what's important, and the way that it's being presented really shows the depth of the work that's going on behind the scenes. So thank you for that work, Jessica. So I'm now going to put the motion. All in favour say aye. Those opposed say nay. I declare that carried. We're now moving on to agenda item 6. Jessica's staying in the hot seat. We're now on page 14 for update on recycling curbside and, update on reducing curbside recycling contamination. Is there anything that you wish to open up with before we open for questions?
Tēnā koutou, just my apologies, we haven't got the January stats back yet, so I can't update you on the contamination rate for January. But yes, just essentially this is our interim report back following the paper in September last year. So as you'll see in the paper, we haven't necessarily come to a final outcome on some of the investigations, but wanted to provide an update on the process, having focused on looking into those different options, but also strengthening our own process alongside our contract and the foundation of data for future actions. Kia ora, happy to take questions.
Perfect. The floor's now open, starting with Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. I'm interested in on page 14, advocate government for right-sized bins to be the right of any tenant of a rental property, and in particular, there's a Kaingaroa property up in Taita that is consistently overloaded with rubbish, and I don't know if they've got big bins, and every day I drive past there, there's rubbish on the burn every day. So is there any progress on this advocating government to get those departments to address this?
We are still looking for opportunities with a bit more backing from perhaps industry groups, as well as if there was legislation in front of us. For Kaingaroa, my understanding is that they do set the bin size relative to the number of people in the property. So that is a slightly different approach to private landlords, but if there are any issues, we're happy to look into them. Thank you.
Can I just follow up? So we do have one of our staff is working directly with Kaingaroa on various properties. Now, in just one example, more recently, it's not actually the residents that are causing the issue. It's that the way the waste storage area is set up is it attracts waste from outside, whether that be neighbours or other people driving past it. Just use the opportunity to dump what might be like chairs and tables and stuff like that. So unfortunately, that's outside of our control. It's effectively the property owners of Kaingaroa that needs to take the lead on updating or improving the waste storage area. We can supply the bins, but we can't make them upgrade the storage area. And we do have a guide for that, and a well-run storage area reduces the risk of illegal dumping. So for example, is it a lock-up? Is it sheltered from public view? Those sort of factors play a big role compared to a situation where it might just be an open 3 cubic meter bin that's sort of visible from the street, which almost invites, I guess, the wrong behaviour. So we are working closely with Kaingaroa, but in some instances, it's wider than just limited to that particular property.
Yeah, to be honest, they do come in and clean up, and I see it. Then I go past the next day and it's all back out there again. I think you're quite right. It may not necessarily be the residents. If we just keep the pressure on, it's quite a persistent problem.
Councillor Brown, then Councillor Mitchell.
I know that's a hard ask to advocate to government about tenants and private tenancies, and then that brings in the landlords, not the tenants. There's quite a bit about the bin ambassadors, which is good. Do the bin ambassadors pick that up where there may be areas where they've clearly, or streets, clearly got the wrong size bins? And have you had any more thought on how you talk with landlords?
So in terms of overflow issues, that is one area of our data that we're really trying to work on, in part to inform any further actions that we would potentially consider about mandatory upsizing. So what the bin ambassadors have is a portal on their phones, so that's what they're entering the data into. We have now, in the last few months, made it a mandatory field that they look when the bins are out. If the recycling bin is next to the general rubbish bin, if there's contamination, or if not, is the general waste bin overflowing? And so we're trying to make sure we have a good foundation and to see whether or not that actually is a strong link. And then it can help inform future actions of going, well, we actually are seeing this as a problem that's actively contributing to our contamination, and it can help with that advocacy side as well. We're also have found, incidentally, with the new second strike letter, that we are actually getting more contact from landlords getting in touch with us because they get the letter as a ratepayer. So we could also have a think about whether or not there's opportunities in there if we have found that there's a clear link between the bin being too small.
Councillor Mitchell.
Just before I get coming back to the issue with shared bins and rubbish coming in from outside, is there an opportunity either in conversation with Kāinga Order or through another mechanism like the bylaw to require that shared bin facilities are secure? You mentioned security as one recommendation we have, that they're a lockable facility or something like that. Do we have any way of requiring that?
We do for new developments, and that's part of the consenting process. And you know, when they apply for a consent, basically the team gets notified, and then a staff member actually reviews the waste minimisation or waste management plans, so that for any multi-unit dwellings, it is in line with our expectations. The situation is a little bit more complicated with existing properties, and that's kind of more of a working through with the property owner or Kāinga Order, as the case may be, to see whether that can be upgraded to align more closely with what we would see as best practice.
Thank you. Just a couple of other questions. One, it was really great to see the sample letter that's sent out about red stickering of recycling bins. Just one piece of feedback. I think it required quite a bit of work on behalf of the recipient, perhaps to understand exactly what they've done wrong. And I wondered if our bin inspectors are recording what's been found inside those bins, if that could actually be listed up front in the top of this letter. It says we found some non-accepted materials, but it doesn't say what they were. And I think for these people, the communication of what does and doesn't go in that bin, they haven't got to grips with that, to expect them to go and look it up somewhere and get to grips with it. I just wondered if there was a more immediate way of feeding back to them what it is they've done wrong in that letter there, so they can hopefully change their behaviour.
Thank you. In regards to that, we do have on the sticker itself, it will tick the areas, but we could have a look and see if we can integrate those without increasing the workload too much on this, getting those letters out. But perhaps if we can even point them towards the sticker and say the sticker on your bin will indicate what the products are and the materials. Thank you.
Thank you. And I had a question on a different topic, which was the RFID tags on bins. Talks about how there's a reader above the hopper that can read the bin tags as they're emptied. I was wondering what kind of recording is going on with RFID tags already. Are we recording, for example, every time each household's bin gets tipped? Is that something that we're recording and tracking already?
So we have now got it being tracked live in the Alamos system in the last few months. So that will show when a bin was lifted on which date, and then that RFID should connect to the household data. So we're looking to use those to get it clearer on the contamination side and see how we can efficiently link it into all our sticker data, which is quite a lot of data. But obviously that is actually also showing where there have been issues with a bin moving or potentially having been stolen or shifted, and then also where tags might be missing. So it's actually brought up some dispatch stuff that we need to fix up, but we are now getting better data tracking in with the RFIDs.
Yeah, I just think one potential application of it, we had another paper about the audits of bins and what was in them, and there was really interesting information in there about the percentage of bin space people were actually using. Potentially quite interesting to see who's putting out their bins every week compared to who's, who are those low users who are, we can see are putting them out once a month or less frequently. Maybe how that correlates to bin size as well. I think there's quite useful stuff in that information potentially. Thank you.
Any final questions from committee members? No? I'll then put the recommendation on page 14 that the committee receives and notes the update on opportunities and actions to reduce curbside recycling contamination. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Brown. Is there any discussion? Councillor Brown.
I feel like this is a committee that I ask a lot of questions about the whānau and the families and the receiving. Again, I just want to say, I'm not sure who's doing your comms, but this letter is so good. Love to see this tone across other areas. It is sending a strong message, but the way that you've got it, we're always trying to find sort of comms like this. So well done, and really like the tone that was used. And maybe it is just either pointing them to the sticker or having it in there as well, because you can't sort of identify each letter. Yeah, thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, I'd just like to also comment on some really good stuff happening, particularly around education as well too, down at the Petone Rotary Fair with the Tent of Terrors. It was really interesting when you went into it. Not what I was expecting at all, and that was great. But also Te Raukura, where we had those ambassadors or people there providing a bin for knives and forks and plates, that we weren't using single-use items. So I think it was really great, so well done.
So take the bouquets to secure and for you and the whole team. Amazing work that's going into the community engagement, and definitely noting Councillor Brown's remarks around the tone. As we know, that educating and getting social change takes a long time. And when we're even using those sticks, we need to keep communicating at an appropriate level so that people can actually take on the feedback and hopefully make that change in time as well. So I'm now going to put the motion. All in favour say aye. Those opposed say nay. I declare that carried. Next up, we're on agenda item 7, welcoming up Miriam Randall, Senior Advisor, Climate Change and Sustainability, to join Ewan at the table. We're now on page 25 of the agenda. Over to you, Miriam, for any opening remarks before we go into questions.
Kia ora koutou. I'll keep this pretty short, just mostly to note that in the discussion around the LCA fund, the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund, those webinars that were mentioned there have taken place last week, and we're in the process of uploading the recording onto the website. So it's not there yet, but we're in process at the moment. Other than that, I'll leave it there.
Great. And so first question from myself, Miriam, for you and Ewan, just around on page 26. If you could talk a little bit around the council's carbon footprint and reasons for the increase in the most recent year, sitting behind that data as well. A little bit of elaboration I think would be helpful for the committee and also for the wider community if they choose to watch live or watch back later on.
Yeah, happy to do that. So looking at the last year, there's clearly a very strong increase in emissions, and it's obviously the opposite of what we're trying to do. Although it's noteworthy looking at particularly when you look at paragraph 14 and the graph there that breaks down the increases and the decreases, it's quite clear that the increase is really caused in two areas. It's either landfill emissions or it's in relation to procurement. Now, with the landfill, that's not totally unexpected, given that in that time period, there was quite a lot of development activity, or in the immediate lead up to that time period, there was a lot of development activity. So as waste enters the landfill, there is a lag time, and then obviously that gets reflected in the carbon footprint. So it's effectively a calculation of emission factor time times the amount of waste that goes into the landfill. And if waste volumes go up, that's what you'll see. What that underlines is really the fact that coming back to this other paper that we've just talked about, that really underlines the importance of having that comprehensive work program to really tackle the various waste sources. Now, I'm not saying at all that we've got this nailed or that we'll solve this problem in the next couple of years, but I guess we started seriously on that journey. The second point is procurement emissions. And some of those, and a lot of those emission increases are really due to we're doing more stuff. And that's across the board, whether that's Three Waters or building Nainai Pool. There is more things we're building, so there's more emissions associated with procurement. Now, in some areas, we are measuring the emissions associated with contracts, and so we've got a fairly good idea of what the emissions are. But a good chunk of procurement is still around estimating emissions based on dollars spent. So even if a contract electrifies their whole fleet, because we're using an emission factor that gets calculated by multiplying it with the dollar spend, you wouldn't actually see the benefit of that electrification. So what I would say is that it gives you a good indicator that's where our main problems are, but it's not necessarily an absolute accurate reflection of what the emissions are like in reality, because we're just using dollars spent and multiplying that for a number of the contracts. So the picture is not pretty, but equally I would also say that there are some good news stories, and one of those is that the result of the decision by council to phase out gas in 2021 is starting to bear fruit, and you can see that by a reduction in gas emissions. Now, obviously, they are quite small in relation to the landfill, but when you look at the journey that we're on, I think it's definitely heading in the right direction. And yes, the fleet is now increasingly a very small share. It used to be about 10 times higher than that. But that's because we've electrified most of it. I think it's 75% now with the latest additions of vehicles that have just come in. So we are influencing and managing the things we can control, but there's obviously more work to do on some of the things we can't necessarily control, or we can only just influence, whether that's waste coming into the landfill or whether it's the contractors delivering services on our behalf.
Thank you for that in-depth explanation. I think it's been helpful for the whole committee. Opening for questions, Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora, thank you for the report, but also thank you for that explanation. Following up on that explanation, with contracts, my understanding is that we're reviewing the way that we are contracting, going out for contracts, and having a climate change aspect of that. Are those changes likely to show up in this data? Are we going to be able to shift away from a dollars spent calculation to something that's actually more accurate for taking into account contractors' climate change goals themselves?
There's probably two aspects to this. One is that this data is looking back. So it's looking at the emissions from 23-24. So it will reflect any changes that we made in the lead up to that financial year. So the work that, for example, has been underway over the last year, I don't think would show up probably for another year or two in terms of that carbon footprint. That's probably the first aspect of that. And the second one is around the emissions reported by contractors can sometimes go either way. Sometimes it's a lot lower than you would expect, and sometimes it's a lot higher once you have the actual emissions. So the direction it might take as we firm up on the numbers, it's a little bit unclear, I would say. You add to that?
The other thing that I would add there is that a lot of the work we're doing in the contract space is forward-looking, and so that requires us to, a lot of our contracts we don't procure every year, especially the larger ones. They're for a multiple year a period, and so that requires, we can ask for those contractors to report their emissions during their current contract, but in terms of making change in their contracts, we generally have to wait until that contract is renewed or re-procured. And that is the opportunity to create those real changes in terms of requesting emissions reduction over time. And so even if we change a policy today or implement a work program to do that, it can take quite a few years for those numbers to start to come down. There might only be a few major contracts that are renewed every year, potentially only one. And so then, there is that lag, but it doesn't mean that we're doing a lot of work in terms of signalling to our larger contracts that this is going to be the expectation going forward, asking them to start to report and work on the quality of reporting if it's new for them. And so I think we will see over the next couple of year period that change, probably like a bit of a hockey stick. It will be slow at first and then ramp up. Yeah.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I just noted in the paper there's a report on the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund, but no report on the Community Carbon something fund. And I really see those two funds as two sides of the same coin. Particularly, it's mentioned here a webinar for clubs and groups. Clubs and groups are eligible for both of those grants, and which one they apply for probably will depend on the scale of their project and their ability to co-fund it. So in terms of how our officers are out there promoting these awards and webinars for clubs and groups, are we talking about both funds as options for those groups, or is there a bit of a disconnect there?
I'll do the first part of the answer as well, then I'll pass to officers. So the reason why it's not here is because that sits under Communities, Culture and Partnership Committee, and not having duplication of reporting as well, so it's streamlined. And that's the reason why, and that's the intention to hold under each committee those different aspects as well. I'm happy to pass to officers around engagement and information that's being shared with the public.
Kia ora, thank you for that question. Just to note, was it 2 weeks ago? Yeah, 2 weeks ago, the community boards had their round of meetings. So I attended all 3 community boards and presented on the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund to inform them and ask them to inform their communities about the fund. And in that, I did go through a table that sort of summarised some of the key similarities and differences between the two funds. So in that respect, I have been trying to increase the comms around the fact that both funds are running fairly simultaneously and that there are similarities with them. On the Low Carbon Acceleration page on the website, you'll also find that same table that was in the presentation up there, which links people through to the community fund. So we're trying to increase that crossover, and hopefully if you land on one fund and find it's not a good fit, then you'll be able to navigate to the other one.
Deputy Mayor Lawes.
This report might be coming through, as you say, to Communities Committee. The 2 presentations you did, how was the uptake with the sports clubs and groups?
Unfortunately, we did not have a high uptake. However, I have recorded it, and so that's going on the website. I tried to pick a time that I thought would be appropriate for most people, accessible for most people to attend. However, sometimes people just want to attend in their own time, you know, with a bag of popcorn at the end of the day, maybe not in the middle of the day when they're having their lunch. So my hope is that by offering those 2 options and then also making the recording available, that we'll be able to meet people where they're at. But yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't a large, yeah.
Any final questions? No? So last one from me. Ewan, for a long time, as we've been doing upgrading our fleet and making it electrified, one of the sticking points have been 4-wheel drives and getting those utes. It's great to see replacement in the plan and seeing some of them on site already. Once we get to 78%, what's the remaining vehicles in our fleet that aren't electrified? And is there options to electrify them going forward as well?
Yeah, so we're just working through, you know, the straddlers in the fleet, if you like. So we're actually not far off reaching 80% probably by the middle of this year. And so then for the coming financial year, we're probably only talking probably a dozen vehicles that still need shifting to electric models. And some of those are 4-wheel drives. There's a couple of vans in there that are quite large. So in theory, we might get in a fully electric fleet as early as 2026. That's in theory. I don't want to overpromise, and that'll be electric and plug-in hybrid. That's within the existing budget envelope, and that's also recognizing the transition that we've seen in the fleet. So you will recall that our fleet used to be about 84 vehicles. Through optimization and consolidation, that's gone down to about 67. So obviously replacing 67 vehicles over time is a lot cheaper than doing that with 84 of them. So electrifying the vehicles hasn't necessarily cost more, but we've just utilized the savings from having optimized the fleet. That's probably one thing. In terms of the full electrification, I think I mentioned, well, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but some of those will be plug-in hybrids. So there will still be some emissions associated with fleet use post 2026, 27. And obviously that will only then be eliminated by fully electrifying it over time once those vehicles coming up.
Is it needed right now? Councillor Parkin.
Thank you. Just on that fleet reuse and turnover, are we seeing any impact in terms of the reliability of electrification, particularly fully electric vehicles? And have we looked at extending the length of time that we hold on to vehicles for due to that increase in reliability?
I would say there is definitely less maintenance or servicing costs, whether that's oil changes and the like. And there is research from ECA that backs that up, that, there is less cost, at least with the pure EVs, less so for plug-in hybrids because you still have moving parts. In terms of holding on to them for longer, one key consideration is total cost of ownership. And the reason why we have capital budgets that assume basically a turnover of each vehicle between sort of 4 and 6 years, depending on what it is to maximize the residual value. So the longer we hold on to them, the less money you also get for them when you sell them. And so the total cost of ownership might actually be worse if you hold on to them for longer. So in terms of minimizing the total cost of ownership, it actually is advisable not to wait too long. So that's why we're waiting. Working for a compact car is usually sort of 3.5 to 4 years, no more than that. For utes, it has been a little bit longer, but that might change depending on the total cost of ownership numbers.
Perfect. Now draw everyone's attention to page 25. We've got 2 recommendations. Firstly, that the committee notes the update on climate change work streams currently underway. And 2, notes the updates are only provided for projects or activities where significant progress has been made and where significant changes have occurred since the previous update on the 12th of November 2024. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Parkin. Happy to open with comment. I think the work that's been going on is fantastic. And like I said in the previous paper, all data is good data. And so even seeing trends when we are having higher emissions for our corporate targets, it's good to still have them. When in council's gone by, there was no target, there was no information. And how do you make decisions without good data? This also draws attention to areas that we need to be tightening up in, and particularly our procurement space, and also gives us leverage to make sure that we're doing that as an organisation and not just in isolation. I do want to draw attention to the vehicle fleet, because I know that has been a bit of a pet project for yourself, Ewan, and something that started off very slowly, but has ramped up significantly in previous years. And the fact that we've now got viable options to replace our utes and 4-wheel drives is phenomenal. When we started this project off, that wasn't even foreseeable that we'd ever be able to get to that point. So I'm looking to celebrate us getting to 80% of our fleet being electrified, and also knowing not only the emissions for our corporate targets are better, but actually we're saving ratepayers money by doing this as well. So awesome double win, and looking forward to the incoming council having the opportunity to reach the target of 100% in the next term as well. Any other comments from colleagues? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just to thank you for the carbon footprint reporting and including the link to the actual report on our website, which I did go and have a look at. And one thing that's immediately noticeable is just how much that landfill distorts the whole picture here. And you talked a bit, Ewan, about things that we really can control as an organisation and things that we can influence, but the overall amount of waste going to our landfill, we can try and influence that, but it really depends on the behaviour of residents and businesses, not just in our city, but across the region. I did wonder if there's any opportunity there to try and separate those things out a little bit in this, even in a summary graph like the one included in the paper here. It looks like things are going in the wrong direction, but that's, as we've heard, largely based on that landfill. If it could be separated out, that the operational energy use, for example, which is heading in the right direction, can be seen alongside the rest of the picture, that would be really useful. But thank you for the work and thank you for the report.
Very good suggestion there, Councillor Mitchell. I'm sure the officers will take that up. And I'm now going to happily put the motion on page 25. Ask all in favour say aye. Those opposed say nay. I declare that carried. Thank you, Miriam, for your work. We're now moving on to item 8, the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee Forward Programme for 2025 on page 40. So just passing over to members if there's any questions around the Forward Programme, which is showing on page 41. No. As always, if there's any work that you wish to see coming to this committee, please have a conversation with myself or Alison, and we'll happily consider it. With it being a short elections year cycle, we only have a few more meetings to go of this committee for this triennium. So anything that you do have additional to what's already before us may go into next council's plan and around how they build up towards the next annual plan and subsequent long-term plan. But again, happy to hear your suggestions this side of the election, because I think the more that we have in the forward calendar for the incoming council, the more prepared officers can be with incoming reports, as well as induction, and actually be able to steer the next council to continue the great work that's already occurring. And so now I draw your attention to page 40 and the recommendation that the committee receives and notes the forward programme for 2025 attached as Appendix 1 to the report. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Shaw. All in favour say aye. Aye. I declare that carried. I've received no questions ahead of the meeting, so now we move to our closing formalities and karakia. Thank you, Jack. Please feel free to join in. Me noi tātou. Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia i te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairoa i te ara takatū, ko ia rā e rongo, whakahiri ake ki runga, kia wātea, ai rā, kua wātea, hau pai marere. I declare the meeting formally closed at 2:42.